Oh, the microphone was causing me problems,
All right.
as usual. So I'm hoping this talk will be uncomfortable, but if it is so disturbing to you that it causes you some sort of health issue, you're welcome to leave. That's my trigger warning. I put a lot of thought into that. There will be time for questions after, just as my students do. You can have the whole thing, which will be very confusing, and then just go, what did you mean by that? And then I'll do it again, and that'll be fine. So, we are going to talk about the problem of evil today. The problem of evil is such: if there is a good and all-powerful God, then why do bad things happen? And we, of course, we know multiple attempts by theological thinkers and religious individuals to get us out of this conundrum. Such as perhaps God gave us free will, limited his own power, turned away from the world, or even that some kind of demonic or evil power exists, the devil, checking the power of a righteous God. But of course, none of these possibilities fit the riddle. Would an all-powerful God sit back while terrible things happen to innocent people if he or she was good? If a God was all-powerful, why would he or she be bound in any way? And finally, if a God was all-powerful, then why would Satan matter in the slightest? Thus, we are left with an answer quite often posed by people of faith. It's a mystery. We don't know. And thus it is a matter of personal belief. This is not unlike Slavoj Žižek's reading of American democracy. We know very well that corporate money and the media permeate and dominate the system of our possibilities, and that is quite obviously ruled by the rich, but nonetheless, we vote and we participate in the system. He illustrates how ideology works with a Marx Brothers joke. This man looks like a corrupt idiot and acts like one, but this should not deceive you. He is a corrupt idiot. Well, today I would like to identify a corrupt idiot. Call him a corrupt idiot and go further, do something about it. Now I'm referring to the problem of evil. I think this question is misguided, and as such, it doesn't offer us any useful or meaningful results. I already offered how the proposed solutions are short-sighted. Furthermore, I think we know very well that the problem is not evil. We can look around and see many examples of an evil, an overwhelming amount. They are numerous: war, poverty, terrorism, domestic and sexual abuse, cheating, lying, unfairly apportioned taxes, rush hour traffic, and Nickelback is touring again. It's an easy one every time. Huge. It's a long list. So I think it's unfair to assume there is some beautiful and good world and some charming human character which inhabits it, which are then disturbed by evil acts. No. No. Wrong. Injustice structures our lives. Pollution, borders, wealth, homelessness, and these aren't particularly new things if you're keeping score. Even on a natural level, species have been emerging and dying out since the beginning of time. Consider that our world is fueled by the remains of decaying corpses, oil. The world is no picnic. So what is the problem here? Why can't we call an idiot an idiot? Or better yet, once we call an idiot, why don't we stop being idiots? Well, it is the investment of Western education and ideology to push that human beings are rational, that we are creatures who tend to make logical choices and who generally act for the greater good when reasonable conditions are present. This, in short, we refer to in philosophy and political theory as liberalism. But these are ideas we have trouble taking seriously. There's a space of doubt in every single one of us. We will go about each day, for instance, assuming that a random axe murderer will not come to chop our heads off, or that we won't be the ones to lose our jobs in the next decline, or to become a victim of sexual assault. But when these things happen, as they often do, we say, very well, people are selfish, the world is not fair. I always knew that. This is what Freud refers to as the uncanny, that kind of terrifying deja vu of when something repressed comes to the surface. And what we've repressed is a very real feeling that people are not inherently good or reasonable. They're emotional. They can and often do make stupid and harmful choices. We've all been cheated on or lost a loved one, and we know that the world doesn't care for us. That's not to say that people are plotting against us or that there are devils running around causing mischief and ruining our futures. It means that there generally are very few concerns of goodwill and community. Societies are set up to create wealth and flows of power and information continue unimpeded without concern for you, your dreams, or your future. So what I'm saying is that the problem of evil has the issue reversed. Even evolutionarily, we seem to be skeptical and quite ready for confrontation. Call that fight or flight. We have to become idiots. So the question is not about immorality. I think we all understand that pretty well. There's a lot of it. The question is about good. The problem of good, if you will. Why do we assume things will be good when we have all the evidence to the contrary? Why do we view bad things as aberrations, disturbing an otherwise tranquil and kind universe? Today I will take up this question. The lecture is not about the problem of evil, which I think actually doesn't confound most of us on a very basic level, but the problem of good. Now you might be thinking, why not split the difference? People are neither good nor bad, but simply make choices based on their circumstances, regarding or amounting to a number of positions, both moral and immoral. But I think this is unfair and an unreasonable attempt to slide around the problem, and it ignores the evidence. For if one is to be concerned with choices, then one should be concerned with what drives those choices. And if we look around us, I don't think it's very difficult to assert that selfishness, greed, and one's personal desires are in no short supply. Nor are some quite particularly nasty consequences for humans, animals, and the environment. In fact, are these not the virtues overtly backing the philosophy of one particular political party in America? That is the idea, if we lower taxes for the rich and allow a seasoned businessman the reins, won't we create a better country by promoting individualism and self-interest? While it's true that other voices have existed in resistance to this way of thinking, and I've spoken about this before, think of women's rights movements, Martin Luther King Jr.'s peaceful protests, workers' movements, all of these promoting community values like inclusion, equality, human rights, etc. As sober historians, we must realize these movements emerge as counterforces to dominant narratives of segregation, patriarchy, and other exclusionary sentiments fueled by selfishness, greed, and indifference and hatred of others. Even today, sexism, xenophobia, etc. continue to dominate our discourses. Let's build a wall, for example. And now we're proposing to cut the health care of the elderly, rebuking LGBT victories that have barely seen the ink dry on the court rulings. We are doing ourselves no favors and forging no solutions by failing to accept these very simple facts. There is a compulsive, repetitive, and destructive nature to human beings this history illustrates. It is what Freud entitles the death drive. It is my assertion that in recognizing this, we may be able to get off this roller coaster that is our human history and make some better, more lasting choices in favor of human rights. If we are to challenge evil and really make some changes, we must be willing to face ourselves and face our own humanity and history. Evil is not an aberration. Good is. It is acts of good which turn us away from an honest assessment of our predicament by offering us hope and clouding our judgment. With each great human achievement, we feel a little closer. We can say, there's human progress. And we allow ourselves to get caught in a failed cycle because these civil rights achievements feel good. And to be fair, it is difficult to admit our own powerlessness and our own vulnerabilities. but we have to. As Martin Luther King Jr. put it at the end of his life, we're integrating into a burning house. What good are civil rights if the system itself is unfair? Or as we see in today's multicultural world, simply a reduction of identities and differences to neoliberal assimilation and appropriation. To use The Walking Dead, since you're falling asleep, to explain this here, because you're young.
Because you're young.
So, spoiler alert. Early in the show, we assume the world can be divided into two groups. Those who have the zombie virus and those who don't. And of course, this is very nice and simple to draw such clear distinctions, such as we often do. Things are good or evil. But later on, we discover that everyone has the virus, and that everyone will become a zombie upon death. The rest of the show becomes more complicated once this sobering fact is revealed, and we see a number of attempts to make something of what this new condition of life is. Well, we are the Walking Dead. Zombie viruses aside, this is our human condition. Tragedies and triumphs, a roller coaster that has always taken us back to this point. We are all infected. We are all the sums of our drives and desires, and nothing more. We are not rational creatures, and we are not essentially good. I would like to spend the rest of the talk evidencing this point by illustrating how we are already very much aware of this destructive nature. And I think Freud's notion of the uncanny is useful here. To put this briefly, we were always aware of the nature and presence of evil, and this is evidenced by, first, our great efforts to repress this knowledge and to convince ourselves of human goodness and rationality, and secondly, by the magnitude of our horror at events which remind us of our nature and the evil double, our true personhood, who constantly shadows us. I will work from the horror to the repression, naturally. I already evidenced our feelings at interpersonal trauma when bad things happen to us. And these feelings are only exacerbated at the social and institutional level. We live in a world that, despite appearances, has only become more insecure and unstable. And we all know this deep down inside. The recent WikiLeaks dump, which showed the extent the CIA has access and has been using this access to spy on everyday American citizens, is evidence of the emerging paranoia of network security. The increase in growth and span of computer hacking is a particularly good first example, as we all know how reliant countries and economies are on the internet. If you don't think this is so, then may I remind you of current allegations involving the Russian government influencing the presidency of the richest and strongest country on earth. Huge. I'll give you a minute to laugh. Thank you. Kills all the time. Not unrelated, quite recently in 2008, we stood on the verge of complete global financial collapse. Just in the US alone, this required billions in bailouts, while sinking other economies around the world entirely. Finally, the election of Donald Trump, which unearthed some of the vilest discrimination towards the handicapped, Mexicans, and other minorities. Today, the president refuses to take action against a number of anti-Semitic acts across the country. Instead, he explains that this is probably a conspiracy. Never heard that before. Anti-Semitism is a conspiracy. Now, I'll begin with this last example because there was a beautiful sketch on Saturday Night Live that will help me unpack it, and it serves as a particularly useful model. Many Americans were shocked by Donald Trump's victory and to the extent of the populist racism which follows him. Some of us were not, though. People of color, trans individuals, and others were not afforded the comforting myth of progress. On SNL, Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock sit in a room of white liberals watching the election. As Clinton loses state after state, they continue to make excuses. Oh, she will win the next one. This state doesn't have that many electoral votes anyway. Things like this until Trump wins the presidency, and they are shocked to learn that America is racist. And the joke is on them in a sardonic way. Chappelle's show was great at this kind of thing, by the way. You see, it was no surprise to Rock and Chappelle, two black men, that America is racist. But to liberals, this repressed truth was traumatic. The true conditions of minority life in America are for the most part repressed and replaced with a comforting and specious narrative of human progress and civil rights. When Trump won, that narrative was exploded for a lot of folks. And the repressed racism, sexism, homophobia, poverty that structures the daily lives of so many of us became apparent. But again, the uncanny, the horror of a repressed truth, of a history of institutional racism, exclusion, and theft that is so difficult to face, surfaced. And absolutely the same is true for cybersecurity and for the economy. We know capitalism is itself a series of booms and busts. So when a bubble like the housing market pops, all it reveals is what we have convinced ourselves otherwise of, because it's too difficult to function with. The knowledge that our wealth is insecure, and so are our jobs and our livelihoods. Hello? Credit cards. How many of us even operate with actual funds? The global economy doesn't, Wall Street doesn't, Trump doesn't. Similarly, the growth of the NSA and the increase of cybersecurity products help us to feel better about what is then obviously a vulnerability. Why else the need for them? But when the obvious happens, and yes, now even the government and the CIA get hacked, we are forced to face our fears, which are only more terrifying because we spent such an effort to repress them. Now, I didn't bring up environmental concerns, but only because of how laughable they might be. We face deforestation, soil irradiation, severe climate change, and the possibility of outright extinction, and the response to such trauma is to bring back coal from the president, or to bring your own bag to the grocery store. And the bee is gone from Honey Nut Cheerios, by the way, so you can feel okay. We're making a difference. Talk about repression? I will. So how do we repress them? We know why we do. Well, I talked about a major one. We create counter-narratives to the ugly reality. The myth of human progress is the main one. That we've come out of the cave and through the dark ages to create an evolved and moral society. And yet we still torture folks. Genocide is still happening as we speak. People starve in the richest country on earth. But the argument is that we live in a civilized society that has moved beyond bigotry and prejudice, post-race, post-sex, etc., and allows democratic participation. Or at the very least, we're doing the best we can, it's complicated, the best of all worlds, it's kind of Leibnizian argument, which I think is far more disturbing. So if you feel things could be better, you can donate to the NAACP or participate in PFLAG. The ACLU got more donations than they ever have this year. And you can assuage any fears you might have, that we still have any traces of our colonialist, racist, and sexist past. Hopefully I've made a nuisance of myself and cut that one up enough for you, so I'd like to move on to less obvious examples. And those, of course, involve transference and sublimation. So essentially, in addition to propping up narratives about how the world really isn't, we like to spend a lot of time talking about the world as it really is, so we won't have to think about it anymore. This is essentially the history of the confessional. Today, the confessional takes on more forms than it ever has, from the literal in the history of the church, to therapy, and to the numerous forms of revelation we have today, such as reality TV and social media, which is, of course, the most nefarious example, as both posts and liked content are turned into revenue by algorithms on sites like Facebook. Our world are, in fact, structurally set up to induce constant confession, as Foucault noted, and that has only increased with current technologies and practices. We can't shut up. All of which, not coincidentally, also direct the flows of wealth and information from the majority to those with immense power and resources. So we like to talk about how shitty we are. It makes us feel better. We think that once the words are spoken, they disappear. They disappear, much like the residue in the toilet. It just goes away. But we know it doesn't. Right? We have this saying, get something off my chest. But you don't. Just like once you post it on Facebook, it doesn't disappear. Mark Zuckerberg owns it, it's their property, and it's sitting in a data bank somewhere, ready for extrapolation by the NSA and whoever else. The same is true of your guilt, indiscretions, and fears. This is better, I'm moving around. Now I know the difference here. We use social media, psychiatrists, friends, to attempt acts of transference, to shift our guilt off of us, but this only goes so far. When you tell your partner, honey, I cheated on you, you aren't telling them for their sake, but to relieve your own burden. And you might assume that because you told the truth, you are now honest, and this is automatically ethical or good. But I couldn't disagree more. Honesty can be a vehicle for deception, especially self-deception. Now you are on to your next lever, and perhaps you are haunted by your previous indiscretion. It didn't go away. Gasp. You feel anxious, ill at ease, or now you say, well, I guess I'm a cheater, and since I'm honest about it, it's okay. It's cool. What are you going to do? Much the way Zizek argues, it wasn't ethical to bring back discussions of torture in the Iraq War simply because we were doing it. The very fact that we would debate if such a thing was okay speaks not to our honesty, but our immorality. To even honor a debate on such a human rights violation should be a horrifying thought. I think of the Amy Winehouse song, Clever. I cheated myself like I knew I would. I told you I was trouble. You know that I'm no good. Essentially, hey, I told you the history of this, and now it's your burden if I cheat on you. Here we should see honesty is far from ethical, and in fact is the weapon of a kind of double victimization. And the cheating of oneself here, as she puts it, really amounts to a trap of self-deception and compulsive destructive habits. As Jennifer Lawrence says to Bradley Cooper's character in Silver Linings Playbook, there's always going to be a part of me that's sloppy and dirty, but I like that, with all the other parts of myself. Can you say the same about yourself, F-bomber? Can you forgive? Practice that for a while, guys. And of course, this is a worthy and commendable step forward from passive acceptance, but it merely appropriates the jouissance of the death drive rather than understanding or challenging it. Jackie is another movie I think that's a great kind of example of this, perhaps more soberly so, the destruction of illusion, if you will. So there are both the pitfalls of transference and the confession. Finally, sublimation. It only gets better, don't it? I'm referring in this case to finding an outlet for our fears and repressed desires and finding socially acceptable ways to enjoy them. I've already mentioned The Walking Dead, and of course there are numerous other examples of apocalyptic entertainment. We are hopeless, and this is a safe way to enjoy the end times. On another note, I would like to bring up the character of Harley Quinn because I think it is telling on a number of levels. Harley Quinn was made famous most recently by a film called Suicide Squad, more apocalyptic pleasure. Harley has been made the symbol of teenage girls, and the timing is not unsurprising. Harley is the Joker's psychotic lover, who has no trouble enduring the endless trauma of domestic abuse upon him. In a culture right now that is grappling with questions of sexual assault, notably because of allegations made about the president by victims and claims he himself has made in favor, there are a lot of questions about what is acceptable to engage in and even to enjoy. Amidst these identity politic arguments, one's repressed vulnerability emerges, the uncanny. And the desire to sublimate fantasies of violence and eroticism, such as in 50 Shades of Grey or Grayer, all of this, are telling today. Freud writes that the uncanny often refers to a return to infantile and primitive desires. Could this not be the reason for the rise of Trump and his racist populist following? Perhaps the identity politics of Obama and the emerging humanity of so many marginalized groups was a terrifying experience for a portion of white America. Could it have summoned a repressed vulnerability which was quickly filled in with racism, xenophobia, and sexism? Is this not what white supremacists and neo-Nazi groups who support him are alleging when they use the propaganda like 14/88 to allege the white race is endangered. This is an outright admission of vulnerability. Shia LaBeouf didn't seem to take their sentiment. What the confession and forms of sublimation evidence is that the problem of evil is something that clearly fills us with anxiety, and thus we must be relieved of it. But as I've offered, viewing the problem of evil as it is has not led to meaningful solutions. We continue as a species towards destruction. Now, far from accepting this destruction as essential to our nature, I think a number of solutions could be in order. Just because one abandons hope does not mean they abandon themselves. In fact, if you haven't caught on, I think abandoning hope could be the surest way to finding oneself. Carlo Michelstaedter, in his work Persuasion and Rhetoric, notes that those who are not persuaded unto themselves will fall for any rhetoric. They'll be good citizens or family members or churchgoers or Americans, but it will never add up. They will always be looking and trying to fill each space of doubt that arises from each role they take on with something else. This is what we do. We're emotional creatures, not rational beings. So the sum of our actions doesn't add up to anything consistent. And instead of exploring these contradictions, most of us use what reasoning skills we have to justify them. Tidy all do, but we're messes, and this is difficult to take. Not hopeless messes, because we've done some good. I'm a hot mess anyway. It's a different kind. But we need to trade the rhetoric, the grand heroic gestures of progress and rational personhood, for one that recognizes injustice and recognizes our human capabilities as they truly are. And yes, this doesn't offer us a lot of options, but it does offer the only two options aside from delusions of grandeur. In Krzysztof Kieslowski's 1993 film Blue, after realizing the rhetoric of her life couldn't be justified any longer, the lead character's husband and child died, and she also found out the husband had cheated. The main character, Julie, states, "Now I only have one thing left to do. Nothing. I don't want any belongings, any memories, no friends, no love. Those things are all traps." And essentially, she could disappear and be unto herself, avoiding all the roles and deceptive attempts we make to fill our gaps. Michelstaedter, I won't lie, killed himself. As my favorite lyric of Days and Days offers, people are ugly and people are hateful, destructive and greedy, we're proud and ungrateful. The world would be so much better off without us. And this isn't without cause, as we all agree on some level about the nature of humans. But there is a second option, that we can draw from the recognition of these premises, and that is that we abandon all the narratives we have been offered, both good and bad. We make a world in our own image where we truly have a shot at the creation of things like justice and virtue, because we are building them with tools within our own human reach and capabilities. In short, the human species needs to be unto itself and self-fulfilled. As another Days and Days song puts it, life's a game, life's a joke, F-bomb it, why not go for broke? Trade in all your chips and learn how to be free. And for the Yugo life that Days and Days finds themselves in, this meant self-imposed homelessness. And to be fair, the grass is actually greener when there really is grass. But I've given numerous other examples of how one might challenge this narrative or perform a new narrative, such as the infamous computer cult Anonymous does. So I won't bore you with a series of details. The means will be unique to you. The point is that we challenge these unfit human narratives, and we continue life in a way that speaks to who we really are. No stories, no ideas, no gods of the earth, ourselves. And if this is not hopeful, I'm sorry, but you're stuck with you. Until then, we are the idiot who recognizes evil and then ties his own hands. Thank you.